Is he complicit in those war crimes? Is he complicit in the genocide that you have identified in Gaza?
So there's clearly, to me, sheer hypocrisy.
From Joe Biden?
From the United States administration.
Do you support holding Hamas to account as well?
I don't necessarily share their views on many issues, but I think I do understand the plight of these people. Islamophobia is a reality. It is real. It's happening. You can see such blatant prejudices from Berlusconi in the past to many of the rhetorics in the United States these days.
Many people believe what's happening in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs is also a genocide.
I dispute that. In a world where there's so much deficit, trust deficit, contradictions, hypocrisy, racism, religious fanaticism, Malaysia must be able to showcase that a multiracial, multireligious country can make it through good governance, through tolerance, and particularly with Muslim majority population.
What do you say to Malaysian Muslims, including Malaysian political parties, who say they want to bring in Hudud punishments, the stonings, the beatings, the lashings? What is the future of that in Malaysia?
There was a very provocative question.
I don't know anything about provocative questions. It's one of the most remarkable stories in modern-day global politics. I'm talking about the political journey of Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, who from early on in his career was always expected to become Malaysian Prime Minister. That was until 1999, when his very own mentor, Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, imprisoned him on false charges of sodomy and corruption after kicking Anwar out of the government and watching him lead Malaysia's opposition movement. Anwar was eventually released in 2004, only to be imprisoned by the government again 10 years later, after getting thousands of Malaysians to protest what many saw as a corrupt government election. Today, Anwar has gone from sitting in solitary confinement to sitting in the highest seat of Malaysian politics, after winning the premiership in 2022 at the ripe age of 75. Under his tenure, Anwar is attempting to turn Malaysia into an economic powerhouse, as well as standing up to the West on Gaza. The Prime Minister has been perhaps one of the most vocal critics of Israel's genocide in Gaza, though some worry that Anwar has maybe taken his support for Palestine too far after he met with and even praised leaders of Hamas. For Zeteo, I went to Kuala Lumpur to sit down with Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim for a wide-ranging and challenging interview on the future of Malaysia, democracy, Islam, and yes, Gaza. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, welcome to Zeteo. Thank you for doing this interview.
Thank you, Mehdi.
It was about 30 years ago that you became Deputy Prime Minister under Mahathir Mohamad. You were seen as the person who would one day take over the premiership of Malaysia. But it hasn't been an easy journey for you. You were imprisoned twice on bogus charges. You faced beatings, torture in prison. And when you were eventually released from prison in 2018, you came back towards power, but were denied it again in 2020. You're now finally Prime Minister. You have been for almost 2 years now. What does it feel like to finally be in this position, to be in the Prime Ministerial residence?
Well, you are in the position to execute most of your policies. I mean, that's the immense pleasure that one can have. Although there are challenges, but I'm more assertive, confident that we can do it. We have been doing it in the last 2 years.
What are you most proud of having executed since 2022?
Good governance. I think countries, developing countries, most countries for that matter, Muslim countries, included the issue of poor governance, endemic corruption, and we has experienced that too, more systemic corruption in the last decades, and I think it is our duty to clean up the mess.
So you talk about cleaning up the mess. Before we get to that, just big picture Malaysia. This is a multicultural, multiracial, multi-faith country, Muslim majority, Islam mentioned in the Constitution. What is your vision for Malaysia? What do you want the world to know, our subscribers, our viewers around the world to know about Malaysia that they don't know?
In a world where there's so much deficit, trust deficit, contradictions, hypocrisy, racism, religious fanaticism, Malaysia must be able to showcase that a multiracial, multireligious country can make it through good governance, through tolerance, and particularly with Muslim majority population. We showcase that Muslim majority can help manage a country with good governance and prepare the economy.
So it's interesting, you mentioned tolerance, and we'll come back to religion and tolerance. Just in terms of political tolerance, some people might say you're a little too tolerant towards the people who put you in prison. You're now in a coalition government with the BN, with the Barisan Nasional, who are partly behind your arrest, imprisonment on bogus charges. They're now in coalition with you. How do you explain that situation to people?
We have to move on. It is a coalition, but the principles must be made clear. No tolerance of corruption, abuse of power, and focus on the economic development. And I think that is the term. I mean, I can't go and talk about the years of torture and deprivation that Aziza, my wife, and the children too suffered, and many of the colleagues dismissed and detained without trial, thousands of them through these years. But I think it's more important to do something effective for the country and the people.
Your own experience of having been a victim of abuse, of violation of human rights, what has that made you think about human rights on your watch as Prime Minister?
You have a greater passion for freedom, for tolerance, for humanity. And I think, as I've said, that what the world and particularly political elites lack is this passion for humanity, for compassion, and there's too much contradictions in what they preach and what they practice.
So on that note, you were designated as an Amnesty prisoner of conscience when you were falsely imprisoned and tortured. I think, and I may be wrong here, I haven't doubled up, triple checked this, you may be the only former Amnesty prisoner of conscience who is now a world leader in a position of power, as you say. You've won praise for getting rid of the mandatory death penalty here in Malaysia. Human rights groups have praised you for that. But they've also criticized you as well. Amnesty International has said that your government has used, quote, repressive laws to silence critical voices and prevent peaceful protest. Human Rights Watch has said of your first year in power, quote, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim betrayed the reform pledges he made to Malaysian voters so he could hold his coalition together. What is your response to these human rights groups who once campaigned for your freedom?
What evidence have they adduced? Amnesty International is a colleague. I of course, engaged with them in the past. And, but what is the issue?
They say, for example, your government has doubled the number of investigations under the Sedition Act last year, which was an act you said you would get rid of.
Yeah, the sedition involves the sultans and the rulers in this country. The constitution provides that protection. They are not in politics. They are not supposed to respond. So we see you can criticize the Prime Minister. They've called the Prime Minister Antichrist and Jewish agent, American agent, Chinese agent, all sorts of names. They have not been charged or investigated. But we have a limit, and they know the Constitution, they know the law, and they know the limits.
What about your political opponents? I live in the United States of America, where Donald Trump is on the verge of returning to office, perhaps.
It's a bad example.
It's a bad example, but the worry about Trump is he says, I'm going to prosecute my opponents, I'm going to get revenge. And Bloomberg News the other week published a rather big piece on you. I don't know if you saw it.
Yes.
And they questioned whether you're guilty of, quote, perpetuating revenge politics, especially, they said, the opening of investigations into at least 3 of your former political opponents and their families, including ex-PM Mahathir, at the same time as you dropped an investigation into your deputy prime minister. What's your response to Bloomberg?
No, let's take this case. We have ex-leaders amassing wealth by the billions. Do I then stop investigations? I did not instruct investigations, but I gave clear.
Bloomberg claims you did. They have saying you
they have no evidence to adduce that. We have taken a case against them because a very frivolous assertion. But as far as I'm concerned, if you use office to amass billions of dollars, I can close just because they happen to be in the opposition or the government, regardless.
How come you've given your deputy prime minister a pass then?
I did not give him a pass.
His name is Ahmed Zahid Hamidi.
Yes, I did not give him a pass. He was never convicted.
Well, he wasn't convicted because the prosecutors decided to just drop the case against him without much of an explanation. People took to the streets of Malaysia, your own supporters protesting.
Yes, rightly so, and we tolerated them.
But why drop the case?
I did not drop the case. It's for the Attorney General to decide.
Isn't the Attorney General part of your government?
Yes, but it is an independent decision by the Attorney General. And not only that, they have also dropped cases against the preferred against the opposition leaders. Why is that not an issue? But the more important thing is that the large-scale corruption cases are still being investigated and charged, and it's for the court to decide, not for
your
me.
Deputy Prime Minister was facing charges of corruption, money laundering, breach of trust. You came to power very proudly saying you're going to stamp out corruption. Do you at least understand the perception that it looks odd that your Deputy Prime Minister gets off, but your political opponents get investigated?
The issues of corruption is issue of law and facts,
perception
not
matters in
perception.
politics.
Perception does matter,
People
but
are
when you
disillusioned
are
if they
in the
think-
position to execute and run the country, you don't run based on perceptions.
Do you think you're winning the battle against corruption?
Yes.
What evidence do you have?
Well, you have seen that because the decisions that we have made, number one, we have the Financial Responsibility Act, we have, which means accountability to the parliament. We have taken serious actions against many leaders or corporate leaders who have been known to be amassing wealth for the last few decades. And there is no more negotiated tenders, which is a route to squander public funds. All tender processes are transparent. And I think this is a very good start. Have we been really successful in wiping out corruption? No. I have said that corruption is systemic. It takes time. Daily, almost every other day, without exception, you have seen the Anti-Corruption Commission going after immigration or
And that
customs.
commission, just to clarify before we move on, you don't have anything to do with it. You don't give them their marching orders. You haven't called them up and say, go after this person.
I did give general marching orders. Do not condone corruption. Move aggressively.
You have been, let's talk about Gaza, a big issue globally for a lot of our viewers, for a lot of people around the world. You have been quite outspoken about Israel's assault on Gaza, even calling it a genocide, a word that many Western leaders avoid saying at all costs. What has it been like for you personally, as a Prime Minister of Malaysia, as a Muslim, as a father, to see what we have seen unfolding on our TV screens, on our phones for the past year?
Well, I've followed this case for the last many, many decades. I've been even arrested when I was a student leader supporting the Palestinian cause, that is of Arafat. I've attended the PLO session.
I think he called you a son of Palestine.
Yes, in 1983 or much earlier. And so it's not new. But the sheer hypocrisy of many of the countries in the West to condone this, to me, is shocking, it's appalling. And therefore, we have to speak up. I mean, Malaysia is a small country, but I think it is a voice of conscience and represent the vast majority of Malaysians.
I think you represent the vast majority of a lot of people around the world. You mentioned hypocrisy on this issue. In May, when you were asked if the US is complicit in the war crimes Israel is committing, you said that you are, quote, in no position to deny that. Does that mean that, in your view, President Joe Biden of the United States, who has been driving much of that support for Israel, giving aid, giving bombs in an almost unconditional way, is he complicit in those war crimes? Is he complicit in the genocide that you have identified in Gaza?
Well, complicity in the genocide per se is, of course, a strictly legal question. But
morally?
Yeah, in certain, there's, of course, I've said that, moral abandonment, which means you condemn, you say ceasefire, at the same time, you've been sending weapons. So there's clearly, to me, sheer hypocrisy.
From Joe Biden?
From the United States administration.
The US, obviously, is a crucial player in this. Israel is becoming a bit of a pariah in the world, I think it's fair to say, with the law cases, with countries now trying to bring in sanctions, Colombia, other countries. Malaysia has said that you won't allow any Israeli ships to dock in your ports.
Yes.
Some people would say, why not extend that to US ships? Why not take a stand against the US? Because Israel can't do anything without US support. Is that on the horizon?
Be realistic, then you have to go against hundreds or probably umpteen other countries. I think we do confine ourselves to the issue of Palestine and the direct perpetration by Israel. And it's interesting when you mention ship, because it was condoned in the past by all earlier prime ministers in the name of the Islamic Party, Malay Party.
Despite Malaysia having no relation to it?
Yeah, which is, again, some part of hypocrisy in this country, and which you need to be exposed, and that's why we took a tough decision to stop that.
In March, during a visit to Berlin in front of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, you fiercely criticized Europe's position on the conflict, on the genocide. You pointed out, that they only concerned about one particular incident and one victim, namely Israel, and forgetting the suffering of the Palestinians. Those remarks of yours went viral online. Tell me, what were you thinking in that moment? You're sitting in Germany, country where the Holocaust happened, a government which is very pro-Israel. You represent an Asian country, a middle-income country. What were you thinking there when you made those remarks? Because the Chancellor looked pretty uncomfortable sitting next to you.
But Chancellor Olaf Scholz is a good friend, and a very, very frank exchange with him. He was very candid. I took a lot of pain in trying to explain to him. Of course, he understands that, fair, but then there was a very provocative question.
I don't know anything about provocative questions.
So I have no choice. I have to say the truth.
Yeah.
And I think, to be fair to Olaf Scholz, he was exceedingly kind and polite, and we went on for another 2 hours after that of intensive discussions.
Do you think it's interesting that what you said that day probably represents the views of more Europeans than European leaders do?
I believe it represents many Europeans, but certainly the younger ones, the students, the youth.
100%.
They appeal, they have been demanding for justice, and they have expressed their horror and anger for this despicable act to continue.
This past May, the ICC chief prosecutor requested a series of arrest warrants, including for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as his defense minister Yoav Gallant. Do you support arrest warrants for those two men? And do you believe Western countries should execute those warrants if they are handed down by the court?
Well, once the court decide if they are members of the ICC, which many of the European countries in the United States are not members, it's also an issue. But
Why isn't Malaysia a member, by the way?
Well, there are issues because of the conditions imposed, and I think we had some issues earlier then, but we are reviewing that now.
Okay. But you, in principle, support the idea of Netanyahu being held to account for war crimes?
We are, in principle, support of any possible measure by the international community to stop this madness.
So it's interesting because the ICC chief prosecutor asked for 5 arrest warrants, 2 for Netanyahu and Gallant, 3 for leaders of Hamas, including Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed in Tehran not long ago. Do you support holding Hamas to account as well?
Well, you don't prosecute the victim. That's my position. That's why I have an issue with ICC.
Hamas can't actually carry out atrocities?
No, but they were victims. Maybe
Palestinians are victims, but is Hamas?
Yeah, but they have been colonized. They have been elected as leaders to represent their people. I don't necessarily share their views on many issues, but I think I do understand the plight of these people. If one part of my country is being colonized, I wouldn't stop at anything just to make sure they have freedom.
But you can be pro-Palestinian without being pro-Hamas.
Of course I'm pro-Palestinian.
Yeah, but you can be pro-Palestinian without being pro-Hamas.
Sure, but it's up to the Palestinians to decide whom they want.
Agreed, but you're the Prime Minister of Malaysia. You can decide who you want to support.
I support Palestinian cause.
Well, you met with Ismail Haniyeh in May before he was killed and faced a lot of criticism for it, which you responded to after he was killed, saying that those critics of yours, quote, failed to appreciate his deep desire for a peaceful Middle East. A lot of people would say, Prime Minister, that's an outrageous thing to say about a man who praised October the 7th, praised the killing of Israeli civilians, even praised Osama bin Laden when he died.
Mehdi, view and look with some empathy to the cause of those who has been colonized. And
but that's Palestinians again. I'm asking about Hamas.
I'm talking about Hamas represents the Palestinians. Not all Palestinians are partial Palestinians, but they are Palestinians, regardless whether they are.
Excuse war crimes. Netanyahu represents Israelis, but he's still committing war crimes.
Why did you call Mandela and committed crimes? No, for example.
But why did the US call him
yes,
terrorist?
the same issue. You don't call victims and the colonized in their decision to fight the colonial masters as terrorists.
Some people think that some of your rhetoric about Hamas since October the 7th is driven by domestic politics in Malaysia, that you have the PAS party, an Islamic party, which is the single biggest party in your parliament right now, not part of your coalition, but that you have this challenge from the kind of quote-unquote Islamic right, I don't know if that's the right phrase, and that's why you're making all these statements about Hamas, because you want to kind of pacify your conservative Muslim constituency at home. What do you say to people who say that?
Mehdi, I've been in touch with all these groups, whether I agree or disagree, for the last 4 or 5 decades, long before Hamas was formed. And so I don't see why I need to be dictated by the times here. I have known Hania for the last few decades.
What do you believe is the resolution to the Israel-Palestine conflict?
First, stop this aggression.
Agreed, that's short term.
Yeah,
What do you think
okay.
what
But
does the political
immediately,
solution
of
look
course,
like?
once you stop that and withdraw.
So it's a classic two-state solution.
Yes,
Oslo.
yes. Which, of course, is not easy, but then what else do you have there?
And the US has to make it happen, right?
It is essentially the US decision. They can make it happen, but it is a known fact that it will be extremely difficult to persuade them to see the facts and the truth.
In August, the Wall Street Journal published an article about your country with the headline being, "Anger over US's Gaza policy opens door wider for China." And a lot of American think tanks like the Wilson Center in DC are saying that China is exploiting the Gaza issue to get closer to a lot of Muslim majority countries. Do you think that's true? And do you feel Malaysia's relationship with China has grown stronger since October the 7th?
Long before October 7th, we have had excellent, or should I say good bilateral relation. But when I assume office, I have decided that, look, we have to work with our neighbors. ASEAN is a priority. We have India, we have China, we have Australia. And we have given the clear foreign policy
But
prescription.
you've praised China's stance on Gaza while you've criticized the US's, right?
Yeah, because they've taken a position that's quite familiar, similar
It's a
to
cynical
ours.
position, though, isn't it? Do you believe that China gives a damn about the people of Palestine?
What is
Given what they're
important?
doing to
Well,
Muslims in Xinjiang, you know about the Uyghur situation. Can a country that treats its own Muslims so badly really give a damn about?
I don't think it's a fair to compare these two situations where you have complete genocide and open killings on a daily basis with the issue of Uyghur. And with Uyghur, unlike the Israeli position.
Many people believe what's happening in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs is also a genocide.
I dispute that. But
What do you think it is? How would you describe it?
notwithstanding that there are differences, there are issues with the people of Uyghur, there are avenues. Unlike Israel, which has refused to have any
So has China.
discussion. No,
Mr. China
no.
does not
to-
discuss the Uyghur situation. Has he discussed it with
What
you?
public? Well, in private, I do discuss.
Do you condemn what's happening to the Uyghurs?
I discuss. I ask questions, and
But do you
I.
condemn it? Because you're condemning Israel, so I'm just asking if
Well,
you condemn
if I'm convinced that there are evidence, not necessarily from Western propaganda.
It's from groups like Amnesty that supported you.
Yes, that's why I raised the issue. Precisely because of that, I raised the
And
issue.
what answer did you get back?
Well, they said,
They're going to deny it, obviously.
of course they deny, but what's more important, Mehdi, is that they do take this into consideration. You see, it's not bare denial.
I interviewed Imran Khan when, and this is prior to him going to prison, obviously, and he refused to say anything critical of China either. There's a view that says a lot of Muslim leaders are happy to criticize America, Israel, Europe, but they won't criticize China because they rely too much on China. Is that fair?
It is not fair because this attempt like, equating Ukraine with Gaza or equating Uyghur issue with Gaza.
Let's talk about Ukraine.
It's completely, to me, is unfounded because it is grossly unfair.
Okay, so forget Gaza for a moment. Just Ukraine. You mentioned Ukraine.
Yes.
Do you condemn Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine and his annexation?
I have, in my Yunga speech, I have condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But it's a different situation, but partly because Putin is prepared to enter into a negotiation. I've said it in Vladivostok in front of Putin.
But you also praised Putin as well there.
I praise him for other issues, for Global South, for BRICS.
So again, the cynic would say, and I'd love to hear your response to this, that Malaysia right now is trying to join the BRICS, right? Which is, of course, the economic coalition of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And do you feel that Malaysia's economic interests, you're a middle-income country, you're not a superpower, you have aspirations, and we'll talk about that. But do you believe that need to be part of BRICS means you would like to say more about China or Russia, but you can't.
Not necessarily. I've said it publicly about the invasion of Ukraine. I've discussed with Chinese leaders, and they have been quite, prepared to at least listen and give the avenue. I have praised America on a number of issues.
So you're playing a balancing act.
And not balance what I consider is right and what is important for the country.
Fair play. During your recent meeting with Putin on Ukraine, you talked about the, quote, enormous potential for enhancing trade relations with Russia. And unfortunately, when I see that, I can't help but think of former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, who in 2022 was removed from office in a coup that a lot of people believe the US was involved in and was driven by what they thought was his closeness with Russia. Do you worry about your own seat of power here going up against the US? Do you have discussions in Malaysia about what might the US do to me if I get too close to Russia or China?
The intelligence agencies are more worried.
Yours?
Yes.
Okay.
Fair. And I listen, but I think they're
worried about the US?
No, they're worried because they understand the geopolitics, they understand what's happening, what has been happening in Africa and many other countries.
On that tightrope
yes,
in all these countries.
But I assured them, look, we should continue to maintain good relations with the United States. I mean, largest foreign investments is still from the United States, cumulatively is from the United States. They have a lot of interest here. Now, we have not, I mean, to be fair, we have not seen any sign of the United States meddling into internal politics.
That's what I was about to ask. Have they not spoken to you? No one from the administration has reached out to you or your people to say, what is Anwar saying about Putin or China or Hamas? You've not heard any feedback?
More so regarding China, and of course some concerns about my visit to Vladivostok. But we did explain, China is an important neighbor, it's the largest trading partner now. And we don't have issues. Well, you talk about South China. Yeah, South China Sea. We have issues with all our neighbors. But why single out?
China's the aggressive one in the South China Sea.
No, why single out China? That's why I said
this
is the discourse of the West.
Hold on. That's
no,
not the discourse of the West.
Is the discourse of the West.
Hold on. Japan, the Philippines, multiple neighbors have called out China.
We have issues, neighbor issues, boundary issues with China and the Philippines and Indonesia and Singapore and Brunei and Thailand.
You do?
Yes.
But all I'm saying is a lot
But
of
we don't go to war with these countries. We engage with them, we discuss with them. So is with China.
What's the solution with China, by the way?
Bilateral, multilateral, ASEAN, we continue to negotiate.
These economic partnerships with Russia and China, they are growing. Malaysia potentially could join BRICS. Your country saw a GDP increase of nearly 6% in the second quarter of this year, way surpassing initial estimates. I believe the economy is set to expand up to 5% overall this year. Is the economy doing better than it did at the start of your premiership, and what is the cause of that?
Well, I would say there are also international and the regional atmosphere, which is conducive, but more so is the issue of governance, is transparency, clarity of policies, and effective execution of policies, ease of doing business. And I think that has probably change the perception of the country, because in the past it's always been totally corrupt countries, one MDB, nothing else. Yeah. So we say, look, we do not condone that. And in fact, the crusade against corruption is tough.
We talked about the Chinese leadership, we talked about Putin, we talked about Netanyahu. Let's talk about some other controversial leaders, particularly in the US. Former President Donald Trump is running for re-election. I know you spoke to him, I believe, recently after the attempted assassination attempt.
No, I didn't.
Or you sent your regards, yes. I believe you, publicly to check he was okay. He says that if he wins, he's going to bring back an even bigger Muslim ban. How worried are you about that, as well as his brazen, blatant Islamophobia?
Well, we have to deal with it. I strongly object to that. We will certainly express our views. But the days of racism, of religious bigotry, of Islamophobia must end. And I think even smaller countries will continue to express. Hopefully he will adjust and change with power. Nobody knows.
I don't think that's the case.
Well, I agree with you, but...
There's no evidence that he's about to change his views. He may be worse than before. There are a lot of Muslims, Prime Minister, you know this, living in the West, in Europe, in the United States, North America, who are feeling very uncertain about the world right now and their place in the West as Western Muslims, having been born and brought up there. I include myself here. There's talk of plan Bs. What do we do? Where do we go if we're not welcome here? You've had Islamophobic race riots in the UK over the summer. Donald Trump on the cusp of returning to power with a Muslim ban. A lot of people know you as a politician, as an opposition leader, but you've also been a scholar of Islam. You've taught at Georgetown in DC, at Oxford University in the UK. What is your message to a lot of Western Muslims watching this right now saying, what is our place? Where do we fit in? Do you have a view on that?
I did participate in one of the sessions European Muslims held, I think, in Istanbul some years back, where they have to make the decision. But of course, they have to express their views. They are Germans or French or Americans. They should not regard themselves as Muslim ghettos, and therefore they should be able to interact with the community. But I do, empathize with them, their predicament, and I think it is the role of not only Muslim countries but general countries all over the world to just express their disgust and protest against any sort of unfair treatment of minorities all over. We are as concerned about our minorities here, and I think on such a moral high ground, we continue to express our views.
So talking about here, a lot of the Islamophobia in the West, many Islamophobes would argue, well, we don't like Islam because look at the state of Muslim countries. Look at the state of the Islamic world. In the West, when you say Muslim country, you think Afghanistan and the treatment of women, Iran and the treatment of women, Saudi Arabia and the treatment of all sorts of minorities. People don't automatically think of Malaysia, which is a Muslim majority country and a democracy. What is it like being the Muslim prime minister of a Muslim majority country that also sees itself as a democracy with free and fair elections?
Well, that is a problem because the discourse there is skewed to a certain particular view. To them, only Afghanistan represents the Muslim world. And that is, we've been trying to tell them, but it is a major challenge. Islamophobia is a reality. It is real. It's happening. You can see such blatant prejudices from Berlusconi in the past to many of the rhetorics in the United States these days. But we'll continue.
But what is, for example, you mentioned our minorities here. In a country where I think 1/3 of the country is not Muslim, is Hindu, Buddhist.
More than a third.
More than a third. But it's still a Muslim majority country. Islam is mentioned in the constitution. What is the relationship then between those non-Muslim minorities and the Muslim majority?
They have equal rights as citizens. And some of the issues they raised. I mean, I had a meeting, for example, with the mainly Indian Hindu leaders recently, expressing their concern about some issues, about access to education, but we allow them. I mean, we're here, and we try to resolve most of these issues.
What do you say to Malaysian Muslims, including Malaysian political parties, who say they want to bring in Hudud punishments, the stonings, the beatings, the lashings? What is the future of that in Malaysia?
Well, they have not got the priorities right. I mean, certainly our priority is peace and security, economic development. And they know that. They have said that. But they will use this at the right time, particularly closer to the elections. When they were in power, they said, no, Hudud is not our priority now. Okay. You see, so we will have
using it cynically as a stick to beat you with.
Yeah, it is more political, because otherwise in Islam too, you have this, I should say, issue of priorities. To me, the priority is peace and security. It's a multiracial country.
Do you believe there is a place in Islam in 2024 for these kind of punishments?
Certainly not, because we are not in the position to execute them. We will have to build a consensus if that's what the vast majority want. Not likely for now. Of course, the religious bigots will go after me after listening to the Mehdi interview about talking about Hudud. But I'm a Muslim. I'm a practicing Muslim. I make no apologies about it. But I think there are priorities. We have to survive. We have to make sure there is peace, security. We have to make sure we deal with the bread butter issues.
Focus on the right
thing. And more so with these days of post-normal times and digitalization, energy transition, then we should then come up and deal with these issues. These are priorities: better education, quality education, better health services, and not to be talking about issues that they themselves know they are not going to execute.
Well, let me get you one more question to get you in a bit more trouble with the religious bigots. When I spoke to you back in 2018, you criticized Malaysia's anti-LGBT laws, the same laws which led to your own imprisonment on bogus charges. You called them, quote, archaic, and you said they were a legacy of British colonialism, not of Islam. You told me that those laws, quote, have to be revised and amended. But since becoming Prime Minister, you haven't done that. Why?
Yeah, there are many other priorities. I want first security of this country. I want to build this consensus. I want the focus in the fundamental economy is quality education. That's not my priority. That's the priority in Europe.
If it's not your priority, why did the government literally raid Swatch stores last year and seize Rainbow Pride watches? Why?
I disagree.
You disagree with what?
I disagree with the action. We have told them. There was no order. I mean, it's a decision taken by the particular department. And I think they are overreacting.
Okay. You've talked a lot about how when you were in prison, you spent a lot of time studying Shakespeare's works.
Yeah.
I was reading this recently, and you told Time magazine recently that your favorite of those works, at least when it comes to politics, is King Lear. Why?
No, I think towards the end. With his
which part?
dialogue with the Cordelia,
Okay.
the sadness about this theatre and looking at the players and being a bit so cynical about the whole theatrics of political elites.
You also used to sing in prison, I believe, to get
Oh
through.
yes, yes.
What songs did you sing, and can you give us a brief rendition?
You see, in prison, one of my favorite numbers is "Release Me."
Okay.
But outside, I can't because the lyrics, you see, that my wife will take strong objection.
Okay.
But in prison, the context was "Release Me," so that I can get out of prison. But I can't
Do you still
sing
sing?
it now. Well, yes.
You've always been a hopeful person, I think it's fair to say. You got through prison by keeping hope alive. Your ruling coalition's name in English is Alliance of Hope. How do you keep hope alive today in a world that is on fire?
For Malaysians, I have consistently said that I believe in the wisdom of the masses, that general people have that passion for freedom, for goodness, for humane ethics. I've seen that working. Yes, in the first few months it was horrible, terrible for us. There were a lot of cynicism, a lot of concern about we shifting and leaving Islam or leaving the Malay issues. But I think given some time, they've seen us to be really consistent. But the challenge for any political elite is to honor the commitment, to execute policies consistent with what they have pronounced in the past. And that's a major challenge. And I think if we can deliver that, I would say, inshallah, we can then showcase Malaysia. That's important. We are not in the position to solve all the problems of the world. We will continue to engage and express our position boldly, but at the same time, the battle is the home ground.
Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.